And let's see. Let's see it. There we are. Hi, everyone. It's Sir Rithkin from Ontier, and I'm here with His Royal Majesty Uther of the West. He's been king, I think, 12 times of the West and once of Ontier. So he knows what he's talking about when we talk about reigning. We usually start these with your origin story. So if you'd like to tell us how you found the SCA and when and where, that would be great.
Sure. So when I joined the SCA was very different than it is now. It was at an apex of membership and how big it was, and things were banging. And this also a very different time because there is no internet, there is no social media, and if you wanted a helmet, you had to go to some major event or order it from one of the armorers at there. So getting armor or getting started was very different. And then I lived in the Bay Area where there wasn't a lot of workshops in the Bay Area for making armor and things. And so I kept going to this thing called fighter practice. And that was what okay, fighter practice. I got to get me some fighting going on. And I'm wandering around trying to meet people. At the time, it was our mission college practice. It was like our Mecca. It was a high point in our fighting culture in the West. And all these dukes, Duke Jade, later Duke Fab, who became Duke Fabian, John of Skye, all these Western like legends. Duke Beck was fighting out of that practice. I mean, it was just like a who's who of the West Kingdom fighting there. And I'm wandering around this big goofy guy in my early 20s, 21, and I couldn't really connect with anybody. And everyone was very intense, and they were getting ready for Crown tournament. And I'm like, well, what's that? Or how do you get to that? Or what's going on? And I'd gotten to the point where I'd gone to 2 or 3 of these, and I'd also gone up to Rockridge practice and tried it out there as well. And Rockridge had this loaner armor, but you had to go through this like 6 months indoctrination course with Sir Hillary, which I was like, I don't need 6 months of wandering around with you and doing Zen poses in the parking lot to get to armor. I'm not doing that. I'm going to kill you, lady. And that sounds unrespectful. But I was like, she's really nice, and she was a really amazing peer, but like she had this really lengthy process to get to the loaner armor, and I'm like, I'm not in. And so I go to one more fighter practice. I literally tell my brother, I'm going to one more of these fighter practice things, and if I can meet somebody or make a connection, I'm going to do that. Otherwise, this must not be for me. And so I meet John Theopolis. And John Theopolis is the most enthusiastic, amazing person to meet for any new person in our kingdom to this day. I mean, the guy's an amazing peer, fun, bombastic. He's like, oh, you like armor? Have you met Fabian? Let me introduce you. Fabian, this is Anthony. Anthony wants to fight. Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, literally, he just starts introducing me around like I'm his buddy. And suddenly I'd gone to 3 or 4 of these things and could meet nobody. And now I have John Theopolis, and he's given me a lot of attention, and I get introduced around, and I hook up with Fabian, and Fabian was really generous with his time. And I start making armor in his garage. And 3 months later, I come out of Fabian's garage with a suit of armor, partly loaner parts, partly thing. And then that's when the helmet I ordered from the armorer showed up. And I bought a helmet that someone else had ordered that didn't fit them. I bought it cash. I was really into it. And then I started fighting, and that was what kind of launched me. And it was really love at first go. I'd already done martial arts and judo, jiu-jitsu. I'd done a lot of physical activities, and I wouldn't call myself a jock, but I was relatively physically able. And a role-playing nerd for 20 years. It's from birth a role-playing and sci-fi nerd. And so I can remember as a kid, back when you couldn't like just on cable call up any TV show, I stayed in a TV store in the mall to watch Robin Hood on a little couch thing they had and watched the movie from start to finish. And the guys didn't throw me out because I was so happy watching Errol Flynn. That's how much of a nerd I was as a kid. And so that's a little bit kind of how I come to this.
So you spent 3 months making armor before you had even fought?
Oh yeah, I could not get any armor. I was pretty sure that this is what I wanted to do. And I very firmly believed if I could get some armor on me, and I mean, that's exactly how I'm going to get me see some armor. I'm going to do some stuff. I'm going to do some fighting. And my whole thing was, if I didn't like it, clearly I could just sell it, right? But I was really, look, I was so all in from the, people talk about the magic of the SCA grabs you, or the ethos in the SCA grabs you. And there was this feeling you got my first year, and I think a lot of people experience this, of coming home or finding the thing you didn't know you were missing, or it's like that thing in a Matrix where they give you the two pills and you find out the secret truth that you've always wanted to know. That was me finding the SCA. I'm like, nerds like me, and I get to be a king and I get to be a knight, and my mind exploded and I dove into it. And at the time, by the way, I had this really horrible job where I worked 3 weekends a month. I had 1 weekend off a month. I worked in a paper mill. And so in the midst of all of that, I'm trying to line my 1 weekend up on the good events. And when I got my armor finally done after 3 months, I drove after working a graveyard shift and getting off work at like 6 in the morning or something. I got in the car and drove to Santa Maria, 6 hours away, to sign into a tournament my first day, drove back and had to go to work that night on a Saturday, but I fought. And I was so excited. And in between building armor, Fabian was teaching me how to fight. And this is before Fabian is Duke Fabian of legend. And he's just a scruffy guy in a shop somewhere. And a guy named Brian Thornburg, I'm not sure if you know who he is. Brian Price, he did the Chivalry Chronique. He's super instrumental in the 14th century. And the funny thing is, I never met Brian. So you got to understand, I'm in this armory and he's a master, and Fabian says, and Brian's a master laurel, right? And like a master metalworker. I'm thinking of dwarves and things and, making mithril, right? But I thought he must be this god of a man. I mean, armorer, laurel, knight, earl, right? And Brian walks in, and I'm telling you, this dude's like $130 on a good day, 5'6", 5'7" in heels. I mean, I'm like, where's the rest of him, And so, but he was a brilliant armorer, and that was one of the other guys I got exposed to my first couple years in, and he was really generous this time. And so this coat of plates shows up. Fabian gave me the thighs off another set of legs. I made the knees. I made elbows and band braces and a gorget, and then I bought a helmet, and then off to the races. I made shield, all of it, and was down at the practice just banging. And I can remember my first day. My mundane job at the paper mill, I used to push a 5,000-pound roll of paper up a causeway to a giant clamp truck. And if you're in the mill and you're young, you get bored. So you start doing it with your shoulders. And so I got a great workout every day. It was a really physically shitty job that I worked really hard at. And so when I showed up at the SCA, I was ready to go and just passionate about this medieval thing I wanted to, that swallowed me. To my mom for the first few months, like, are you in a cult? I mean, because I was suddenly talking blah 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 blah. SCA couldn't shut me up, and the king and the prince and this and that and the other. And she's like, the king, you have a king now. But yeah, that was me in my 20s.
Cool. So did you start out sword and shield then?
Yes. So at the time, half rounds or bunny rounds were all the rage in the West Kingdom. And my first, I want to say 6 crowns or so, 5 crowns, was a half round. And so I had made both a round shield and a bunny round, took them both to practice, fought with both. Hated the round shield, one fight in, threw that to the side, but the corner on a half round was great. And then all the concepts, I mean, the one thing about fighting with the smaller shield, I think it really gives you, is it forces body dynamics. It forces you to move and do things. And we were working on all these body dynamics, and I had done a lot of slow work, which is very Western, where you're going, helm, sword, shield, and you're going through the motions and you're doing things. And the great thing about slow work is that's a way of learning without getting punished. So I'd had 3 months of while I was making armor doing a lot of that. And I got that half round going and just went for it. And I fought sword and shield, I want to say, for about 2.5 years before I really picked anything else up. Then I had some control problems, or I smashed a few people with the glaive a little hard, too strong for my own good. And so I took a break from great weapons for a while. This is one of the great old days of the SCA where the Earl Marshal walks up to me and goes, you hurt somebody today, or you smashed them too hard. I'm like, oh, sorry. Okay. I'm in trouble again. And I'd already got in trouble a lot for hitting hard with a single sword. So you can only imagine what it was with a glaive. And he goes, you should take a break from a glaive for like 12 months, then try again. And I'm like, oh, and he's like, and if you do that, I won't have to talk to you about this again. What do you say? And I'm like, I'm in. And so I just went with it. And so I had done fairly well with the glaive up until that point, but I'd smashed that guy in a war. And so then about a year after that, I did come back to a glaive, and I did back when Sir Brand was coming up. I cut my teeth in my early squiredom with Brand. We were contemporaries. He came in just a couple years after I did, or very shortly thereafter, and so we did a glaive fighting. I mean, what a guy to fight with a glaive, and he is so much better at the style. And that's how you get good at fighting, in my mind. You find people better at what you're trying to do than you are. You fight them a ton. And I'm a very kinetic fighter. I've always picked things up through osmosis. Generally at practice, like I can remember Duke Beck was amazing to train with, and he would do something and I'd be like, can you show it to me? Can you show it to me? And about the third time he'd show it to me, I could do it back badly. But more to the point, it entered my battle computer or my mind. And I have a very, not as much now in my, like I'm on 50 years old. I can tell you in, I can tell you in my 20s, my fighter memory, and even now it's very good for particular fights for a period after. But in my 20s, I could remember fights from 6 months prior down to the blow because I was so obsessed with fighting. And that made me a good student to observe and be very kinetic about my fighting. And that let me fight great weapons and bastard swords. Because then you go fight someone with a bastard sword for an afternoon, and I come away and I would steal all their bad stuff. And maybe I'm a photocopy of a better version. I've lost 10% in translation, but the key is to keep fighting people better than yourself to become better. And so that's kind of some of the progress there.
But then you make it your own, right? I mean,
I certainly made Sword and Shield my own, and I would say there was a very brief period where I was doing some really great stuff with glaive fighting, and then I was trying to get knighted, and I just stopped fighting. The problem with the glaive, and I love it as a style, but it's a really big win and a big lose. And so you wind up brutalizing people because you don't have the bandwidth to crack a guy twice or three times, or, there's no defense. So you got to hit that guy and you got to make sure you move him offline. He can't hit you back or whatever. And so you start gooning people and then you have fewer friends. And it also isn't a great tournament style. And I had a really interesting seminal experience. So I'm 1 year in the Destier. I go to West Ontier. I do something incredibly stupid. I park on the parking spot for the King. I saw a sign saying the King, and I'm like, I was just trying to figure out where to go next. I'm like, I was just going to be there for a minute. And Duke Beck, smoothest, coolest guy ever, comes walking up to me and goes, that's your car, isn't it? And I'm like, yeah, I'm just trying to figure out where to go. He's like, well, you shouldn't figure that out while you're in the King's parking space, but let me help you out. And I'm like, oh, thank you. And I just remember thinking he was the coolest guy ever. Beck was in his full Germans. He had his big ducal cornet. I mean, Beck is pimping. I mean, he looks amazing, better than any other knight I'd seen, right? And I'm like, I want to be like that guy. And that was one of my early inspirations. And that was somebody who, when you say making it your own, I always thought of Beck, who had a very distinct style. He had a way he fought. And I certainly was chasing that in my Sword and Shield, but I don't think I really got there until I was about, I don't know, 6 years in. Maybe I won my third crown. About that time, I felt like, my second crown. Because what happened is I was in my backyard and I had been doing a stupid amount of Pell work. And in that, I figured out something that I use in my fighting a lot. Most people only generate power on rotating forward, and I'd gotten very good at rotating backwards and using power and doing that. And that was another way of generating power. And then for my judo and jiu-jitsu, what I really realized is about 2 inches above your belly button is about the center of your body, generally what we say in judo and jiu-jitsu. And that really is your center mass. And whenever you move that violently left or right, up or down, you are generating the opportunity for power and mass. So a lot of times you see guys sitting into shots, they're just dropping their center mass, they're sitting into a shot, or coming up into shots. You're moving that center mass, you can get it into the sword and really deliver a lot more power. And back then in the SCA, we were just hitting a lot harder. And so that was an epiphany to me. And then from that, I got to the point where I could throw a wrap and without actually recovering at all, roll my hip into it, tuck my arm and short stick up and about blow somebody's head off. And that was the first, for lack of a better word, signature shot I ever came up with that I had not learned from somebody else, developed, I just didn't come from other place. It was something that I created unto myself. And it's something that's very still unique to me or my line of fighters. and it hits really hard and is very effective. And against strap shields versus center grip shields, it's amazingly effective against heaters and things. Because I always had a side step and get past that corner, and I can do it with the snap to the leg and come up again. And so
I think there's some video floating around of you doing that in an Outlands tourney at Estrella to your
my
brother-in-law.
brother-in-law, yeah. I made Osa cry on that one. I got in trouble because I knocked Ed out in that. Me and Ed, look, I love Ed. Ed is super tough, amazing, and we have a great family. And I can tell you the Jesse the Body Ventura impersonations, oh yeah, that Ed does when he's at Thanksgiving are so worth having. He's the greatest guy to have in my family. But my sister, me and Ed met at Penzic, and we were both stripped to the waist. We're both jacked and cut. And we start wrestling, and Ed like drops me on my head. He's way better at wrestling than I am. And we're having this, and it's drunken night out party wrestling, right? Impress the girls, whatever. And my sister meets Ed there, or shortly thereafter, and we develop a relationship, right? And my sister had always looked out for me and been my heart. My sister was my second queen, my first duchess, and truly my heart. And she looked out for me. And when I jacked Ed in that tournament, I come walking over, and she's like, I don't like when you guys fight. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. I made my sister cry. It was so bad. And Ed, true to his form, came at me in the next fight super hard. But he had just not seen that double hitch before and didn't have anything for it at the time. His kite shield covers that now in a way that his heater didn't.
It's pretty cool video. But did you start in the SCA and bring your brother and sister in, or did you guys all start together?
Kind of. So my brother and I, he'd gone to that fighter practice thing with me a few times. And then when no one talked to him, my brother's not determined. He kind of wandered away. And then about a year or two in to my being in the SCA, my brother started showing up. And then my sister started showing up. And then the moment my sister started looking really good in princess dresses and I fought for her and made her queen, my mom thought the SCA was the best thing ever, and she started showing up because when all the other moms would break out like wedding photos, she'd bring out coronation photos. And so that's kind of how the family went. So about 2 years in, I drugged my brother in, and then within that same time frame, my sister came in and she started doing all of her stuff. And so it was definitely a family affair pretty early on.
That's super cool. So tell me about, because you were talking about how you would get in trouble for hitting too hard. And that's the opposite of most people, right? Like most people have problems figuring out power generation. So tell me about how you figured out how to hit at a level that didn't get you in trouble. How did you hold back and still be, the demon that you are?
I think, honestly, as a 20-year-old man, I had a lot more angst than I do in my 40s. And so I think, you go to your field, you have a little more butterflies and angst in your stomach, you get worked up. I just don't have that anymore. I make much lighter swords now. We hit way lighter than these days than when I joined the society. But what I would say is, I just got a level, somewhere in there about 2 years into my fighting, I found a level of confidence and also level of understanding. And in that confidence and understanding coming together, I was able just to pull back a little bit. And one of the things that was really conflicting about the SCA is calibration is very fluid. You have one guy that you're like cracking and he's like not quite, and you got to turn it up to 9 and then he's happy. And that guy also in many cases isn't a bad guy, right? I mean, there's just different, I've heard a lot of people complain about some of the guys in Atlantia. I love those guys. They throw hard, they play hard, it's very consistent. I like fighting those guys, and so one of my problems in the SCA when I first started is I would work on things ad nauseum, and I was too strong and probably too athletic compared to a lot of people. I mean, 6'6", I was probably 240, 250 pounds at the time. I was getting my body behind everything and I did judo ninjutsu. So the idea of driving and moving, Duke Paul's talked about that affected his fighting. And judo ninjutsu, you get in tune with your body, you know how to move, you know how that goes. And, but about at that 2-year mark or so, I started figuring it out. And what I really figured out is you fight the people who want to fight hard and play rough, you fight them that way. You fight the people who don't want to play that way, you don't fight them that way. And when you feel yourself getting goosed up or getting going, you got to calm back down, especially like on a war field. you fight, like I'm fighting Duke God so-and-so, and then I go over here to his little 5'8" squire who's in hardly any armor, and you crush that person. Now you're a bad person, you know, and they're screaming, rolling around the field. And that's also what armor somebody's wearing. I mean, I think like in my kingdom, when I came up, to give you an example, everybody had 16 gauge plate legs, steel helmets, steel arms, and almost nobody wore body armor, right? And so people hated getting hit with wraps to the body, but you could just crank them in the leg and no one seemed to care because they have big steel legs on. And then you'd leave kingdom and I'd go fight somebody and you crack that guy in the leg. You're like, oh my God, what is wrong with you? You know, and you're trying to find that middle. And so also looking at my opponent's armor, but it just took some maturity, you know, and then also understanding that not every shot's going to be taken, and hitting it harder doesn't necessarily make it better. And that was something also a intellectual lesson. Sometimes you're hitting a location and it could be the armor. It could just be the person doesn't see they're being hit. You've got to almost in some cases let the person see they're getting hit and know what happened. And if you confuse people, they might not take your blow, not because they're a bad person, but because they're just confused.
Right.
And
They just don't understand what happened.
Yeah, I can tell you the number of times I've had somebody say, what was that? Or, you know, and they're looking at me like, I don't want you to light me up, but I don't know that did you hit me? And I'm like, yeah, I kind of pushed you, and, you know, you explain it and like, oh yeah, I'm dead, you know?
Right. Because sometimes it feels like a push instead of a pop, and people are expecting a pop.
Right.
But you actually hit them harder than a pop would have been. Yeah. I think gauging is like such a weird thing because none of us really know how hard we're hitting, right? Because we don't hit ourselves. And so you really don't know if you're taking at the same level as the person that you're fighting, right? Like, it's just a very interesting thing. I've thought about it a lot, but I think
we don't talk about calibration enough, and we're not honest. And I find that people, like, I hear people say all the time, I'll never tell someone to take a shot in a tournament. And I'm like, look, I don't tell people to take shots, but when someone says to me, you know, especially in a tournament situation, well, what did you think? I will just simply say, I thought it was pretty good, but it's up to you. But when I say I thought it was pretty good, I'm trying to get that person, like, my honest opinion. And if I thought it was garbage, I'll call it garbage. And I do a lot of both. But I don't think, but people get this wrapped up in chivalry. And I think that's an area where it's not chivalric to be stoic in that regard. You should just be honest and open and not a jerk.
Right. And if we normalize it a little bit more, then it won't be such a big deal to talk about it.
Right.
Not that I want, you know, us to talk each other to death, but
well, I think fighter practice is the place for that. Because how often you don't fight new people in tournaments very often. You mostly interact with people. And I think if you at practice take the time when you're doing a 7-fight set to have that conversation, that's the time to have that conversation. I don't think in tournament, and I don't think negotiating tournaments is how you win them. I think that practice, you know, and then also with your squires, I think the simple language, I always tell my squires, I've had a lot of guys knighted, and I was always very direct with them. I said, look, it doesn't matter if it's a knight or a duke or not. If he asks you, he doesn't know, and you need to give an honest answer. And here's the thing, if you ask somebody what they thought, unless they tell you no, you got to fall down because you don't know. I was very adamant about when you ask, that means you don't know. And you yourself, like if someone hits you and you're like, well, what did you start asking, unless they tell you no, it was garbage, they don't want to tell you the truth. And I'm like, just fall down, don't worry about it. And that seems to serve my guys well.
Like, if you ask, you're basically ceding your decision. So
yeah.
If they tell you yes, then you should trust them, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I've had several people ask me, well, what did I think? And I'm like, thought it was pretty good. I'll leave that to you. And they're like, okay, I'm not going to take it. And I'm like, all right, I'll hit you harder. And I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I'm like, doing business today. We're in Crown, you know.
Right. So let's back up a second. So you sort of started with Fabian as your mentor, but you ended up squiring to Jade, right? Is that right?
Yeah. I was originally squired to Fabian, and there was a bad love triangle thing and a breakup and with that girl, and that all got happens. You know, weird SCA lifestyle. In my 20s, right? And so those two dated. I moved on, and then Jade. My relationship with Jade was funny because Jade was really generous to me in many regards. Not only was he a personal mentor in my SCA fighting career, he was really a big mentor in my mundane career, my job. But Jade took me on as a squire, and he even said to me, well, I'll squire you. I mean, you're most of the way there. But it'll be a finish up project. And Jade is not a great from acorn to oak teacher. Jade is a much better coach along the way. And so Jade likes getting somebody who is got his shit together. Jade is not a guy that can pound a rivet to save his life either. And then get that person to the next thing. And that's how Jade took me on as a squire. And we just thought it would be a very much briefer thing than it was. And it wound up being a much longer relationship because I was a wild man and just couldn't get knighted for love or money for a while.
So you won your first 2 crowns as an unbelt, right?
Yes, I won my first crown. Um, that's complex. So I win my first crown as an unbelt, and Jade had, at that point in time, Stefano Bellatrix and Jade were like the only 2 other guys in the kingdom that ever won unbelted. And you got to understand, our lists at the time are like rocking 100 guys. So this is a 100-guy crown list. I fought Duke Fabian in finals of that first crown, right? Me and Fabian had a great set of fights. I happened to come out victorious in them. I certainly didn't blow him out or anything. Some of the knights wanted to knight me. Some of the knights didn't want to knight me. It was just, when Jade says, don't let him reign, do his own thing. I regret that you guys knighted me when I won my crown unbelted, and let this just go through, right? And Jade had a really strict policy of you have to get unanimous counsel, and I was not getting a unanimous counsel. Even if I was getting a positive counsel, I wasn't getting unanimous anyways. And so that was our family lineage and how we did business. And so I have my reign. I go through my reign. I reigned with a good friend named Hanwin. She was a really nice lady. She's left SCA immediately after the reign, and the politics and just everything blew her out. And we were young, and it was a little contentious, not horrific or anything. And so then my reign finishes, but Jade won the crown after me, and so Jade didn't want to knight me. Right. And we all thought I was getting knighted. Right. I mean, I don't know how else to say this.
Right.
We all thought I was getting knighted. Right. I mean, I'd won crown. I got a pretty good kit, got myself together. Things are going that direction. I mean, you kind of know when you're in the ballpark. And so the following crown after Jade happens, and the heirs are there, and they're discussing knighting. And in that council, the crown princess coming in expresses to the Knights Council that I slapped Hanwin around and I abused her privately, and nobody knew this, that I slapped women around. And so that the record skips off. I'm not getting knighted. A bunch of knights come out of council, and it is a lot of anger. And Jade comes to me and goes, I have to talk to you. And then takes me like up to a set of bleachers where like a big stadium thing, to the farthest corner of the bleachers, and then does like Secret Service look around and goes, did you ever hit Tanwin, lay a hand on her? You just got to be honest with me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And this is probably the dark side of this. It was just bullshit politics. And but Tanwin had left the SCA, right? So she was no longer around. And this is back not in Facebook where you just go home and Facebook your buddy or something. It's not like, you're not texting, or it's just not like that. It's a different time, right? And so it took a while for that to get cleared up. She came to like the next crown event, she heard about it, comes out of retirement to speak in the Knights Council. The Queen didn't allow her in the Knights Council. But then she went around the event and talked to a bunch of individual knights, and it gets cleared up. But it took about a year. And by that time, there was so much mud in the water and just a lot of ill will that I wasn't getting knighted. And so I, at that time, met a girl in Australia when I was king named Portia. And I took a summer in Australia, and I flew over to Australia, and I just had the most amazing adventures. And I was gone for about 3/4 of the year over in Australia. And so then I come home from Australia, and Jade had told me after that whole cluster started, he said, give me 1 year to straighten this out. And if you don't get knighted, you can fight in crown again. And so I'm like, all right. And so this big political mess happens. To say it's a shit show is an understatement. And I'm this 20-year-old kid. I'm not really equipped to deal with all this. I can honestly say to you, I didn't have the emotional maturity I have today. And I don't know how I even stayed in the society with all of this, but I go through all of this. I come back from Australia and I look at Jade and I go, huh? And he goes, chains are off you, buddy. You go fight in Crown. And I go, no problem. And to say that I came to that Crown with all the angst and youth and enthusiasm is an understatement. And I remember it being emotionally hard. And I remember Osa walking up to me, and she had this little chip necklace, and it's a little Viking rune, and it's the Genefaxy. And she goes, "You're my hero. You've always been my hero, and you've always stood beside me. I know you to be a good man. You go out there and you give it everything you got, and that'll be enough today." And that was the first day I fought for her. I was on fire for her. I was made a better man in that moment. And I went out there and I just tore into that list, and I was fighting with everything I had. And it was a hell of a day. I wound up fighting Hansa in finals. And the odyssey of this is Hansa was unbelted. And so now the West has to deal with, they have two unbelted guys in finals. And finally the Knights are like, maybe it's us. Are we not knighting guys? Because how we got it, again, it's another 80 guy crown list, and so I won that crown list unbelted, and then there was a hell of a Knights Council, and out of that Knights Council, a lot of stuff was said, and I wasn't obviously there for it. My sister actually went there as crown princess, and these guys made us cry, which I was like, I'll kill them, right? And then she comes out, she hugs, and then Jade talks to me, and I was usually going to decline getting knighted because I didn't want it that way. And then Thorfinn, who was a hell of a guy, and Thorfinn was like, he did all the right things. Thorfinn was like the coolest guy, young knight in the kingdom. Thorfinn running around, telling the best stories, always had the good booze, always had a pearl girl on his arm. Thorfinn was the best. Thorfinn vision was a thing, but well before he was knighted. I mean, Thorfinn was amazing. And Thorfinn comes in to me, and him and some of the angels were at the end of my tent. He comes walking in, and he just goes, "Uther, stop being a dummy. We all fought for you. The offer's come. Take it. It's never going to get any better than this." And I did. And so that is how I got offered knighthood.
So you got knighted before you stepped up your second name?
It was during my coronation. So literally my coronation is written in a very nowhere. So at this time, I'm in my Viking fury. I'm in love with Antir, by the way. I'm secretly like fanboying all of Antir because I thought Antir was the land of great Viking heroes, and I loved the place every time I went there because I could fight like a savage there. Everyone applauded versus said, "Oh, you hit too hard." I loved Antir.
Back for more. Right.
Yes. And so my ceremony has this whole thing where Anharid comes in and basically speaks my word fame. And then she's speaking my word fame. On the king goes, "Are you claiming a triad of deeds for this hero?" And she says, "Why, yes, I would then, because he's done 3 great things." And it was like win crown tournament, I won the Eagle Prize tournament, and I'd won crown again, right? Or maybe there was something else I'd won. I don't know. It was 3 great deeds. And the king said, well, then gets into an art debate with Jade of, why is this hero in your hall? Why is he not in the king's hall? And then that flips into me going to into a knighting ceremony during the coronation ceremony. And so in that ceremony, I do a blood oath. I cut my hand open. I bleed all over my sword. It's a super Viking moment in my head, or what I thought was Viking. I mean, I'd seen Richard Burton. I knew what was up. I was thinking of the warlord. It was awesome. So, cool. And Skeggy was down for that. My vigil was interesting because instead of, and I offended a couple people, but to this day, I still think it was the right thing to do. I don't like when you go to a vigil and you got a 5-hour line and it's a bunch of people wishing this guy well, but he's getting knighted, and it's not about knightly advice. And I'd struggled so hard to get knighted. I mean, I'd gone through a lot, clearly, and I wanted to talk to knights, and I wanted the opportunity to talk to them. And so I said my vigil is open to everybody pre-dusk. At dusk, it's knights only, or the royal peers. And some ladies of the kingdom got upset because they felt excluded. And I'm like, look, it's not about gender. It's about, if you're a knight, you're coming in and talk to me. You want to see me, I'll be on vigil before dark. Get in there before then, And I had some really great moments in that vigil. Um, I think
Tell us about one
that
of them.
sure.
Okay.
Uh, I think that one of the things that's beautiful about knighthood is I think all of our knights have a moment, or they have this, and it doesn't matter how crusty that old tunic is and the weird biker boots and, this guy's from AS7, or whatever. There's just these people have all read about this topic, and I find generally universally they all care. And I remember very clear. Philip the Harlech at Exeter had been one of my biggest detractors. Didn't want me knighted. He was sure I'd smack Tamwin around, and she was covering for me. And it was to my greatest detriment. I just felt so small when all that was going on. And I remember him walking into my vigil, and my breath caught. I'm like, oh. And he says, wait. I know that heretofore I've never said a kind word. I wasn't for you getting knighted. But know this, and I mean this sincerely. Tomorrow, when the king makes you knight, you are my brother. We start over again. And I could be wrong. And he shook my hand and left. And that was his knightly advice to me. But to this day, it's one of the things I remember out of my vigil. By the way, I didn't take a drop in my vigil. I don't vigil with drinks. And so I remember these conversations clearly. And it just had the amount of solemnity he brought to that conversation. And here is what I would thought my biggest detractor coming in and behaving in utterly in a chivalric manner. I was blown away. And that to me, I thought was awesome. And to this day, that was probably one of the coolest things I ever heard in a vigil. Garrick von Kupke was the king who knighted me. And he deserves a lot of credit because I was a very controversial figure. He goes ahead and does the thing. And do you know Garrick very well?
I don't.
Garrick is a very panache knight, 14th century, 15th century, dags, everything. He is not the Viking hero at all. And so when he'd read Blood Oath in my ceremony, he thought Uther's, it's poetic license. Uther couldn't possibly cut himself for right. And so when I go pull the knife out of my boot, whack my hand open, right, and I go, on my sword, he is utterly moved by this. And this is another example of the greatness of knighthood, or the thing we do, or the game we play. He reaches down, he picks up my knife, and he goes, good squire, your customs and your lands are not of my own, and not of who and what I am. But in this moment, I am your king. Sticks it in the tip of his thumb, pricks his thumb, throws the knife down, and puts him on mine with a little blood on his thumb. How cool is that? I mean, what a resounding moment for a man who is totally like not that guy. That guy deserves all the credit in the world for one, having the stones to even talk about knighting me, and then to be so in the moment and be such a great king to do that. I thought those are a couple things from my knighting that I remember.
So going from being sort of jaded about knights to getting knighted to now having been king 12 times in the West and once in Antir.
Actually, you're giving me too much credit. It's only 11 times in the West and once in Antir. It's 12.
Do they just count it on the West site as Antir is just okay? So it's 12 complete.
12 complete.
Okay.
And then I've reigned once as prince. So
okay, so there's 13 reigns in there.
Yeah.
But all right. I like how it makes a difference to you, but
well, I don't want to take credit for what I haven't done. I've never got to claim. I don't want to claim accolades I didn't earn.
It's a dozen. How has your view of knighthood changed over that time? You know what I mean? Like
yeah. So I can say that maybe was very wounded for a long time. Clearly, right? Went through a lot. But by the time I got knighted, I think Jade had a fundamental aspect about making me believe in knighthood. And Jade, Jade gets a lot of credit for being a big dumb stick jock. That guy's incredibly well read, very thoughtful, better at public speaking than anybody has the right to be, but he interpersonally can do that as well. And so this, at the time, Jade sat me down, and I had obviously some doubts about knighthood. And what I can say is, Jade, why he wouldn't, why he was accepting of my jadedness or my angst, right? He never made it my problem. He made it the thing we needed to work on and overcome. And he was open-hearted about it, right? So instead of telling me you're wrong, you shouldn't be doing this, he's like, I get it, but do you want to be a knight of great faith, or do you want to be a petty man? You let me know. And he didn't say it so bluntly, because I'm not Jade, I don't have the smoothness, right? But Jade brought me around, and it was like a shying horse that was a little, and so, but because so Jade brought me around to that. And then but that did depart, like, when all that happened, that is when I go to the Viking Eddas, and I go to, like, you're burning halls, you get your revenge, you go on a blood oath. I mean, you do all these things. And I can remember being very passionate and finding and thinking wrongly that the early ethos of chivalry was better than the later ethos of chivalry. And part of it is because a lot of the people I'd had a hard time with were like 14th century guys and the Heatershield guys, or the paw knights. And I'm in this war of the roses of the paw knights, and I'm like, I'm going to smash you in your paws. And but to be honest, I love the 14th century now, in part because that's where all the real armor, a lot of the armor and the best examples of what we do comes from. And I don't like seeing pajama knights. And so in my journey, I go through this really where I'm trying to be a savage hero, and I'm reading Cuchulainn, and I'm reading the Wagner's Ring Cycle, and all about Siegfried and the Wasslings. And when you think about the chivalric figures I'm not referencing maybe the Marshal, Bertrand de Gechlin, Faussar, or other these kind of people. I'm referencing Viking Eddas and things. And so that changes your view on chivalry, and maybe makes you a little more savage, and you get a little more civilized, or you have a little more mercy in your whole soul, I think, when you come to later tomes of chivalry. And I think if I hadn't had that full gamut of experience, I couldn't be where I'm at now. And with maturity came appreciation of, I've read several books on William the Marshal. What an amazing figure, kind of a jerk at times, but a hard man of a different time. And I think, go ahead.
A human, like,
human, right? We're all human.
Right.
So I would say, I think that it didn't happen all at once, but I fundamentally, because of Jade in a lot of ways, never stopped believing in knighthood. I just believe we needed to fix it. And then what I realized is it's not really broken. It's just, the SCA is an imperfect vessel with imperfect people. And sometimes, like a bird, shit happens. And I also think that it's why I've got so many guys knighted. I didn't want anyone to have my path to knighthood. I didn't want anyone to sit in camp going, why can't I get knighted? Why am I not good enough? What's wrong with me? What aren't I doing? I think that we manage our squires very badly in many regards, and I don't ever interrupt any other knight's relationship. But I wish knights were more candid with their squires. I wish. I find that you can be honest without just divulging who said what to your squires and solve a lot of problems. And also, I think when someone says no in a knight's council, you can walk up to that person and say, well, what does a yes look like? So when I hear you saying no, but what are you needing to see yes? What are you needing to see? And I find that to be a very successful strategy to understanding what maybe you have a blind side to your own squire. And so what really changed it for me in part was I got to be a knight and take squires. My first squire was Titus. And Titus was a champion because Titus believed in me much like my sister did before I won that crown. And Jade had asked Titus, can I squire you? Because I don't know if Uther's ever getting knighted at the rate he's going, for fuck's sake. I mean, it was hilarious, right? We're all hanging out. We're all buddies. There was no poaching. He just didn't want Titus to think we don't have a place for you. And he said, nope, I'm waiting for Uther. And I did not know this. And then Titus, much like me, a young man who couldn't always express his emotions, he gets drunk at Estrella, pulls me aside, grabs me by my tunic, and me know, I'm waiting for you to get knighted. Get knighted so I can get squired. And God love him for that. And that just helped put a fire under me. I mean, how can you not still believe in it when those kind of things are happening to you. So that maybe gives you a little bit of your answer, I hope.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And I think you at some point everyone comes to the conclusion that, that there's room in the SCA for all different kinds of nights too. And not
Yes.
everybody is going to be your flavor.
Yeah.
So you have to decide what kind of night you want to be and be that night.
I think that's the truest thing anyone's ever said. I've always thought, especially in a kingdom, because every night out there is somebody's perfect night. And some of that is just not the night that I'm going to be, and I'm not for everybody, and everybody's not for me. And if you can look at the linking qualities, and that's one of the things when I said how great Garrick von Kupke was. Here was this kid, long hair, goatee, scruffy, Viking Spagan helmet, and really in the kingdom they were not knighting guys unless you looked like an Arthurian, bassinet, coat of plates, all this, that'll look they were knighting, right? And if you weren't doing that, you weren't getting knighted in our kingdom for a while. And that's kind of how me and Hansa wound up in finals, because Hansa, as much as he's a peacock today, I knew Hansa back when he was a scruffy Darkwood shieldman, and back in the day when Hansa looked like a sci-fi extra. Did not look like SCA guy number 7 is what he looked like. I mean, it was different, but he always could fight well. But he was squired to a really good night, and he cleaned up well. So.
All right. Well, Merrick asked a good question about reining. We haven't really talked about reining yet, but 12 times. You've reigned 12 times. So what is your now I have to get it in my head. What is your motivation and what keeps you coming back, and what do you like best about reining?
Well, what I like best about reining is fighting in crown. Crown is like church for me. I love being on a crown list. And to be honest with you, Jade had put a geese on me early. He'd said, until you get 5, son, you're not really a duke, or you're not. I'll acknowledge you in front of others, but we know, and it played reindeer games. I need to get my ace. So that was in my heart. But also, I don't know. I mean, I love being in crown tournaments so much. Honestly, when I came down here to fight in your guys' crowns, it's because your guys' crowns were tougher than the West crowns at the time. You guys were still rocking huge numbers. The fighters were amazing. I knew the Western scene, so to speak, and I was on top of the fighting thing there. But I'm like, am I really any good if I can only beat these people? And that drove me. So, but it's a quest for excellence, right? It's like, is my kung fu really that good, or am I good, or can I overcome? And part of that is, if you read like Cuchulainn and you look at like the story of his through the Red Branch, it's all these challenges along the way. First he's in the hall with hearing with all the other young kids, and the druid is pertaining like, this day is a great day, but you'll live a short life. And Cuchulainn doesn't hear that and runs off, because he knows that if he basically takes up arms this day or gets declared a man, he will be the greatest warrior ever. Doesn't hear the short life part of it, because he runs out of the room so fast, and he goes and does that. But he goes all these challenges, and he's constantly testing himself. And if you look at the Viking stories and the Celtic stories and the ethos, there's always like trying to be a people's hero or a greater hero. And I strive for that a lot, and sometimes I failed. I'm not always a great king, but I was really questing for that, I guess.
You've made some pretty phenomenal women queen too, though. Is there something about that gives you some sort of satisfaction, or?
Oh, be very clear. I'm super the romantic guy on the throne. I have to really admire the person I fight for, and I get a lot out of my consort. My sister, that whole story of the chip necklace and everything, fighting for Osa was one of the greatest days of my life, and making her queen the first time, and my mom, and the excitement on my mom, and calling my mom and telling her. And then later, I fought for my girlfriend Portia, and I was madly in love with her at the time, and and my consort. So I'll just leave the names out of it, but I had somebody one time I was dating who I was crazy about, but I also knew that she was going to be a horrific queen, because she just didn't get the game. And so then I'm like, well, I won't fight in crown. And so then she dumped me, because I guess she wanted to be queen. And then somebody else made her queen, and they had the roughest reign ever. And I'm like, dodge that bullet. But I want to make somebody who loves the idea of being queen, and who might not ever get to do it, or I want to raise them up and I want to hold them. I mean, I don't want to sound misogynistic, but I want to hold them up on a pedestal a little bit, and I want to admire my queen. When I fought for Unharred, I mean, what an amazing woman who has done so much and had an amazing history, and I was blessed that she let me fight for her. I mean, she was amazing. And my wife, to get to fight for her, the first time you fight for your wife, I mean, there are all these very unique experiences, and you would not have the satisfaction of the tournament and the win. You don't get that from winning. Like, I've won the Estrella the Outlands tournament a couple times, and I've won the Cancer tournament, and those are great days. 100-guy lists, right? That's not like winning Crown for Your Lady and putting that wreath. I don't know if you know or not. When I proposed to Harmony, I won Crown for her. And then the ring I proposed to her with was the wreath of flowers on her head. I proposed to her on the field with the wreath of roses. And I said, this is the only ring I could only imagine in my life, me making this ring. This is how I knew my life would be. And I'd had that dream since a 20-year-old man, a little immature boy. This immature boy had this dream of proposing to my wife on the field. And I fought for her. And that's how I proposed to her. So I think your inspiration, I think people who can fight without an inspiration, more power to them. It's just not me. I really do get a lot out of that.
I was going to say, I don't think there's anything misogynistic about it at all, because I fight for guys and I feel the same way. So.
Put them on a pedestal. Doesn't that feel good?
You
it's
do.
Fun to, it feels good to raise somebody up.
They're inspiring. They're inspiring. And you want to hold them up so other people can see what you see.
I think in the Arthurian romances, even though they're certainly very dated, I love and this is a theme in the Viking Eddas and the Irish, like the Irish stories. These men, or these heroes, men or women, are rising up to be greater than they thought they could be, because they're called to it, or they're inspired. Like Cuchulainn has this Giza on them, and Mabe of Connaught is marching through and destroying Ulster, and he is the one man who's not laid out with birthing pangs, and he's trying to stop an entire army. And this boy, young boy, he's in his teens, I believe, at this point in his life, is fighting this whole army off and shaming them and trying to stop them. And at one point, he's in the throes of it all, and he's about broken. And his father, who is like this demigod, comes to him. I mean, I love legends. Come on, who doesn't love a little magic? Comes to him and basically tends the fire and says to him, "Be at peace tonight. They're not coming for you, and you're defending the people. So we're here for you." And lets him sleep the night through. And then he gets up refreshed, and he's cleansed for the day, and goes about his quest again. And that you find that kind of theme of being, inspiration or things raising you up. And I just find that today to be true, like many of those moments in the SCA. And that's part of what I'm chasing, I guess, when I fight crowns.
Yeah. One of the things that's impressive about you is that you strive for excellence in like every part of your life. Like, the Battle of the Nations. I remember we ended up on the same plane once when we were going to Australia or something, and you had just come from work, and you're talking animated about your work and striving to be better there. And what drives you for that excellence in everything?
Oh, that's a great question. I certainly part of what drove me in my youth is I didn't want to let my father down. I wanted to own a house. I wanted to be successful in my life, and I wanted to be a good man. And my father is not what you call this great achiever, but he is, in the sense that my father comes from a broken family, broken fathers, alcoholism. I mean, a really rough background, streets of Oakland, raised up, tough kid, right? My dad looked like the Marlboro Man growing up, smoked cigarettes. But I'm telling you, if there was ever a guy who just did the right thing by his family, and like I can remember having problems in school, and my dad arguing with the school for us, or fighting for his kids, and always being there and sticking up for us and doing the right thing. And I just didn't want to be less than my father. And so I internalized a lot of that, and I strove to find my own path to success. And then later, honestly, Jade was a really big influence on me, and Jade had gone way out of his way to talk to me about my career and other things. And I can remember very pointedly, I was in Jade's office, and I'm in corporate.com world during the .com, south of Market, San Francisco. I'm not fitting in. I'm trying to make it work. And Jade looks at me and goes, "Look, man, you're one of the greatest guys I know, but you're such a thug on your exterior of who you are, or you're so bombastic that people don't really get to know you because your exterior pushes them out. And then by the time they get to know you and know you're not that, it's forever." But he's all, if you just let down that facade and tried to fit in or tried to be professional, you could do so much more. But you have to decide you want that. And I'll keep giving you jobs and hiring you. And I'd worked for him a couple of times, by the way. And he's like, "You do great work, but if you want to be a leader, you got to look like a leader." And so I literally had this rock. I mean, I had long blonde hair, not not bald like I am today, or shaving my head. I had full flowing blonde locks and everything. And I remember very pointedly, I'm in South of Market, San Francisco. And after that speech, I thought about it for a day or two. And then I'm like, well, who looks really good? Gay men in the Castro. So I get in the thing. I look up on Yelp, and I'm like, who's got the best barber reviews in the Castro? I go to this very awesome gay barber guy who was then my barber for the next year, who was fabulous. But I'm telling you, that guy could cut hair and make men look fabulous. Went to that guy, cut all my locks off, and I didn't mind because I looked good. And that started me in my professional career. I shaved my goatee, and then I tried, and then I leadership is a really big deal, knighthood and being a duke and things. And I think I've struggled with that the most. I don't think I'm an elegant person, and I've just really struggled. It's probably hard to see it now. I used to have a very pronounced stutter 20 years ago. When I won my coronet and I was Prince of the Mist, I stuttered a lot, and I could not speak publicly. And people asked me about how I got over that. And I said, well, first, you desperately have to want to be king or prince. I mean, I wanted to be king or prince so goddamn bad. And then you have to have a good friend like Jade, who, when I got really excited, "Hey, Anthony, I love you. I'm going to hear your entire story. Just slow down a bit, would you? I'm going to be here the whole time." And he would make it okay and stop me, but he wouldn't ever mock me. And he helped break me in my stuttering. And then I wanted to so badly. And I'd had a stutter as a kid. I get excited, I'd stutter. And I have all these tics that, if you know me, you see them when I get really excited. And I was a very excitable young man. And even today, I still have some of them. Miles makes fun of it. And so, but knowing these things could be overcome, and like reading stories like, that kid who watched Errol Flynn in the video store in the mall. Errol Flynn was a bad man. I mean, look at Robin Hood. That was amazing. I wanted to be like Robin Hood, or I wanted to be that kind of thing. And so I struggled really hard in those areas until I got to the point where I could do some of those things. And then the SCA, look, I grew up in the SCA, man. And I was so fortunate to have the reins I had, because at the time we also had in my kingdom, like Duke Beck. That man's amazing. And he's also very professional, and he worked at Shire into it. We used to joke about it, like me, John Sky, Beck, all these guys worked there, and they were much older than I was. They were mentors to me, and wanting not to be the junior Birdman forever and wanting to grow up is part of put that drive of excellence in me and wanting to do things. And so I didn't want Jade to have wasted his time with me in those conversations. And I didn't want my father to look back at me. And I remember being with Portia or Misha, and I'm in downtown Sydney, and we're walking around in like essentially their Haight Ashbury in Newtown, and we're talking about trying to get a house. And she's floated the idea when we were together of me staying in Australia, and I was unbelted and hadn't got knighted yet. And I'm like, I can't get knighted here. It'd be too easy, and it would just be me not owning up to being a Western knight. And she's like, looks at me, and I'm like, besides, I'm like, my dad bought a house in the Bay Area and made it work, and I've got to do that too. And she just looked at me, and I'm like, I've got to figure it out. And at the time, housing in California had already started skyrocketing. So I just did not know how I was going to get a house. But it meant something to me to not to be, look at my father's line. I didn't want to be the guy who took it backwards. And so that's kind of where those things came from, I guess.
Well, it's interesting because it's like full circle almost, because you are a very charismatic king. You are very good at bringing your kingdom together, or rallying the troops. I mean, when you're king in Ontario, it's like best summer ever, right? Like that was the thing. And you were really, really good at it, of bringing the populace together and inspiring people. I mean, I think you're like number 45 or something. I've talked to 45 dukes, and a great number of them, when I ask who they want to fight, that it's you. Like you're, you know what I mean? Like, so it's cool to me to have you sit here and admit that you were insecure, and that you had, a stutter, and that you've taken this journey by being obsessed and very passionate about fighting. I mean, let's be honest. We all know that. And it's cool. And you've done some really great things with training, and Miles talked about your training a lot. We didn't cover it much, but and it's cool. Like for me to see that full circle is super cool. So
like if someone
not really a question.
It's not really a question. But like, so if someone would have talked to 20-year-old me and said, would you like to win 12 crowns, or would you like to get 9 squires knighted? 20-year-old me, but on 12 crowns. I'm in, winning me some crowns. And today I'm far prouder of all the knights I've had off my line. And to say that those relationships, and I wish I would have been better at a better knight, because the most painful thing as a knight is when I can honestly say that Merlin got so good at fighting because he would have died because I was crushing things, and he was my first squire, and we're fighting. And I can say my first 3 or 4 squires, it was like being in a Spartan Agoge. If you survived the Agoge camp, you were a bad man because it was so brutal and rough, and we were so savage to each other. I mean, it was this thing. And then I was working with Mari Greensleeves, and I was trying to help her towards her journey to knighthood, and I realized how pathetic my teaching was if I didn't have you as an ongoing coaching student, how I could not convey it to you, and I didn't have good words. And so then I stepped back and I went back into my judo and jiu-jitsu training, and then that's when Miles and Alfar, Egil, Rourke to some degree, and Sigurfrith, all of those guys came out of the next generation, and Evander some too. They all went through the backyard practice where we had all these developed drills, and we were like, basically you'd fight on Tuesday night at Mission, you'd go to slow work on Wednesday, and you go to Thursday, you'd go up to Rock Ridge and fight. So we were fighting 3 days a week, and we were living the dream, so to speak. We loved it. And me and Merlin had 2 different ways of teaching. We could bring it together, and then we had all these fundamentals of slow work, and then we invented all these games to make it more fun. And I can say that was something that I was really proud of, way more than winning crowns, because once you get to being a good fighter, you can win crowns. But can you help somebody else get knighted, and can you help them navigate Knights Council so they don't get hung up over something stupid? So yeah.
And can you help them realize their dreams, right? I mean,
yes.
And you've done that with quite a few of your squires. Anyway,
do you ever hear of the tournament challenge, as we used to do?
No.
This is a great story. So I love stories, right?
Yes.
So I'm in all my Viking Fury, winning crowns and doing all this stuff. And Evander, by the way, who's a Boy Scout and super clever, I come to practice and I'm like, okay, guys, what's our toast and our boast this year? And we would do a toast or a boast. You have to do it, and you had to come up, basically boast what you're going to do, toast about it, and then we'd all have it done by the end of the year, right? And so we're all making them, and Evander looks over at me and goes, basically, fuck you, Captain SCA. What haven't you killed? Who aren't you going to smack with the stick? Why don't you do something real? Why don't you graduate high school? And I was like, oh, like, I just got stabbed by my squire at slow work practice, right? And I'm like, all right, Evander, then let me lay out your geese then, and all of you fools. You will win a tournament, you'll get your name registered, your device registered, and you will make a banner, and I will graduate high school. And I had left school. I had ran away from home when I was 16, by the way, lost my last year of high school, or last bit of high school, and then went to work full time when I was 16, 17, kind of illegally. But I was done with school at a very early age. So then I have to go back to my old unified school district, dig my records out of the ashes, find an adult school, sign in. And at the time, I'm working full time at Intuit. And oh, yeah, I'm king of Ontier. And I'm flying around, like I'm flying to and from Ontier with this giant bag of books, armor, and my garb. And I'm trying to graduate high school. And one of the last things I remember is Sven Gunnarsson and his squire. I don't remember his name. He's such a guy. He's knighted now. I'm in a bar in like Canada buying everybody drinks, and I can't drink myself because he's tutoring me in algebra because I'm trying to get past algebra, and I cannot make algebra work in my brain. And my squire Sigurfrith, and bless him, is also at other times is trying to tutor me in algebra. But Sigurfrith is so goddamn smart. He doesn't know how to show work or formulas. He just knows. I mean, I don't know how to say. He just looks at that and starts solving algebraic equations, right? His wife, who is a Camille, who is a seamstress and like a sewing major and a fashion major in college, who had to go through algebra the hard way, comes over and she starts tutoring me and showing me the formulas. I get through all of this, and then I get to the end of the year, and my counselor looks at me, and it's this much older lady, and she's been amazed because I've been there every week with all these packets of work, and I'm turning in all this work. And she goes, Anthony, you need 114 credits to graduate. And I'm like, okay, no problem, I'll make that. She's like, you're technically only allowed to earn 110 in the year. Me and the other teachers have talked about this. We don't think anyone's ever going to check this. So if you just get those extra 4 credits done, we're going to just graduate you. I mean, and by the way, will you be valedictorian? And so I'm like, woo! And so I get my last credits in, and I'm sweating bullets over the algebra, right? And so I get my algebra done. But that's not the greatest accomplishment of this. The greatest accomplishment of this is Sigurfrith, who is the most intellectual. He works in the Stanford Genome Project. He's my squire that literally my forearm is as big as his bicep. I mean, he's just not a big, strong, strapping guy, right? Sigurfrith has doggedly pursued this, and he has worked, and he's gone to every Capode tournament, all these small tournaments, and trying to win a tournament to complete the geese, and he's trying to get it in. It is the Saturday before 12th night, right? And 12th night is the due date, right? And he goes to the Capode, and like it's rainy and shitty, and like 5 guys shows up, but he creaks out a Capode tournament win, runs home from Capode tournament, and then like, I got to get a banner now because he'd never made the banner because he hadn't won a tournament. And then at the last minute, him and his wife whip up a banner, and he comes to 12th night, and he's like, dun, dun, dun. He's got his banner and everything, and we all turn our geese in. And that year, all my squires had devices, banners, names registered. They all won tournaments, and a bunch of people got knighted because that was a hell of a year for us. And so
that's super cool.
It was a fun time to be alive, I gotta tell you.
Excellence all around. All right, well, we've been talking a while, and I could probably talk to you forever, but why don't we go ahead and look at your sword?
Okay.
Yeah.
So when I talk about making a sword, what I'd like to do, and maybe it'll be better to see on the one that's not wrapped, is I say that you've got to know the up and the down, right? And so this first notch right here is where my finger goes in, and my hand is generally loose when I'm fighting and closed when I'm smacking things. And a lot of times there's a little bit of English going into the sword to finish the shot, and put a little, like when you punch something, you snap your hand into it, right? Mm-hmm. There's a little bit of that in my fighting. There's also, and sometimes I'm just driving through, and I'm just going to use like a baseball bat swing. I'm going to pull that weight into you, and my swords are tip heavy. Generally, there's a bit more mass at the end of the stick than there is this. And then, and I like having, if you look at your hand, your 2 center fingers are your longest fingers. And so I have a little more rattan there, if you look at this. And then I've got it carved, and I don't generally carve the back, but it's a lot like if you took half of a modern sword or a classically carved like that acorn shape. I do all that, and then I put that in there. I generally have a trigger. The trigger goes on the side of the sword right here, and this trigger is buried right in the web of my knuckles. I don't have it in the front. I want all the support I can on that. And when I pull my hand down, I want the help of the trigger to get that, because I want to be able to, especially when I'm pulling on things or picking things back up, like when I'm hitting low and coming back up again immediately, I want that. And so I find that this lets me roll my hand, and then there's a little bit of flat on the side of the thing. And what I say to people all the time is, you need to know you're up, you're down. You know, when your hand's on your sword, no matter what you're doing, how up and down your hand is, so you're centered, and you know your left and your right immediately without even thinking about it. And that's what I get out of this. And then I find tennis racket tape to be a great equalizer for stress on the hand, hitting things hard, shock to your elbow. And then I don't wear a glove. I just I have tennis racket tape, and I have a leather demi-gauntlet with a little tie across it. I generally use the plastic Baldar hilts. My hand is so big, I cannot get it into most basket hilts. Those happen to just fit me if I set it up just perfectly. So I've got like 4 or 5 of those. They last forever. I don't generally break them. And so I find this to be really comfortable. And then you get that unfortunate stick clack, or your short stick something you get a lot of stress through. Tennis racket tape really helps out with that a lot, especially when you're hitting things hard.
How long is it?
My sword currently is 36 inches. When I started fighting, 38 was very common, and I fought with 38. And then when low profile thrusting tips got on there, I fought with a 37 with a low profile thrusting tip. And then more recently, after I came back from Battle of Nations fighting, I went to a 36. And part of that is my swords are a lot lighter. And the game, when I say the game's faster now and hits lighter, I don't mean 0 to 60 on shot speed. I mean shot to shot speed. We throw a lot more lighter shots. People are taking lighter. And so using a heavy cutter is not nearly as necessary. And like another inch of rattan does weight up your sword and slows your shot speed down, and you don't need the power like you used to.
And do you use a thin stick then?
I use about 1 3/8 inch, 1.5 rattan, cut down somewhere right around 1.25 to inch and like a bit more than 1 2/8, right? And then I plane the sides, and then I might, like when I'm doing a sword, I might only take the midpoint of the stick and carve it down here, and then leave like the extra bit up here round all the way up. Or if it's a heavier piece of rattan, I'll plane the whole thing down to 1.25 inch. There's a little more of a spine to it then. And then I'm really anal about every piece of my equipment. So I think part of the reason why I win crowns is I believe in preparing for crown. And so I have a whole series of rituals I go through. So it starts with, I make 5 sticks, I carve up 5 swords, take the top 3 I like, wrap them, put them in hilts, go fighter practice, label them 1, 2, and 3 in order of preference about using them. I've used them each a little bit, a couple times, and then I've got a fresh brand new stick at practice. I bring 2 more, or at crown, and I bring other 2 sticks with me to crown should anything happen to my 1 sword. When I came up to fight on tier, I thought it was going to rain. I brought 5 swords because I didn't want a soggy sword in the rounds, and so I had a waterproof bag and 4 extra swords just in case. So it was dry.
It was dry. I was there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. Okay. Well, let's do the final 10 then. The first question, if you could fight anyone in the world, who would it be?
Any like historical figure, SCA, or just anything?
Anybody.
Gulen.
Okay.
Irish legend. I would love to fight that guy. That guy, one of my favorite sagas is that possibly Sigurfrith from the Volsung saga. That man slayed a dragon, did the whole thing, Cool. Bad men.
Cool. All right. Who would you like to see reign in your kingdom?
Sir Brand, without a question. That guy is amazing, and I wish he stopped fighting crowns in SA kind of seriously in the last few years. And he'd been to the final several times and just didn't quite get there. And part of it's he's really just chivalric. One of the finals he finally against Havek, and Havek was fighting buckler and sword. He'd fought the entire day with his glaive, but didn't want to fight a guy with a buckler with a glaive. He didn't think that would be fair, so he got a sword and shield and then lost. I mean, that's his brand.
He's an amazing guy.
Yeah.
All right. If you could talk fighting with anyone in the world for an hour, who would it be?
Talk fighting, possibly Scott Frappier, Duke Felix, the King of the Mid-Realm. I love his views on fighting. I love BSing with that guy. And in part, because he will always wrap it back to history. And uh, he is this amazing knight. I just love that guy. And so to talk like a day with a beer, hanging out, like me and him, our wives made fun of us in Italy. We had not seen each other in months, and we've been all been getting ready to go to the Spain Battle of Nations. We're all gearing up for that, and we see each other and we're like hug, 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 and like hey, and we start hip throwing and checking and doing these things to each other. We start going through all these different things you would do in Buhurt fighting or steel fighting with each other, and that is us all the time. So
cool.
Duke Felix.
What's your favorite medieval-esque or period movie?
Man. I would have, so I'll give you two. I think A Lion in Winter with Katharine Hepburn. Oh my God. I remember even 20 years old, a young man looking at her and thinking she was hot and amazing and dynamic. And I'm like, I'd fight for her in a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. And then if you're going to talk about laughing and enjoying a movie, who doesn't love Knight's Tale? And in some ways, that's a great night story. So both of those movies, sorry to give you two, but.
No, those are two good ones. If you could add or subtract a rule to the rules of the list, what would it be?
Oh man, I have no complaints.
Okay, that's cool.
I would say one thing. I wish that when I was fighting glaive guys or great weapons guys, it's selfish. I just wish that the Eric sometimes was smaller, so we had to engage each other and fight. Because I hate running laps, and that's just because I'm almost 50 now. I don't like running laps anymore. I like fighting, but.
Well, that's a Western problem because you guys don't have any ropes.
Maybe I'll get some ropes from Mark's crown. Who knows? If I ever get a crown, maybe I'll throw some ropes in there.
Yeah. All right. What is your favorite tournament format?
Oh, crown. Double elimination, straight through, 2 out of 3. Please don't mess with church. Don't change it up. And do not tell me what weapons to bring, because I'll tell you right now, not to be rude, but every time they make all these weird weapon things happen in the West, it's like two virgins trying to have sex. Nobody's good at it. It never looks good. You don't get a great fight. It's just not good.
Yeah, so for crown, you want people to fight their best, right?
Bring your best, do your best. Let's do that.
Yeah.
What's your kung fu versus my kung fu?
Yeah. What's your favorite event?
Crown, by far. I love the pageantry. I love in the West, we do very much like on tier. It's a very theatrical opening to the tournament. And when people walk forward and they introduce their lady and they introduce why they're fighting and they make a chivalric declaration for their lady, and you see that guy might go out in 2 rounds, but to see the look in his consort's eyes at him as he says these fine words to the king, and they're all part of that moment, that's beautiful. That is beautiful to me. The tournament itself was amazing. And then you see a pageantry of amazing fights, and you can feel the intensity build towards the day. I mean, like by the end of Crown, when you get to some semifinals and finals, you kind of know you're there. The air is a little tighter. I just love that.
Nice. If you could have any helmet, regardless of cost, what kind would it be?
I would have Vern and Ugo. Sexy me up some 14th century with a ducal coronet and the whole deal. And I would be trying to do some Black Prince over here, and I would just be trying to kill that, because I'm in this 14th century mode right now, because I really want to be a knight wearing a full kit of armor. I don't want to, and I'd hate wearing chainmail. I did it for a while. I even won a crown in a chainmail shirt. I just hated wearing chainmail because it's all the weight and encumbrance and none of the protection. Where my coat of plates, you can smash me in it, and I'm like, good shot. It doesn't matter. So yeah, I would like a helmet from those two in collaboration with a coronet on it.
Yeah, just artistic license, you two. Go for it. Make it pretty.
Yeah.
It's Saturday morning at Estrella, and several people want to talk to you about last night. What did you do?
Oh, man. Well, first, I will say this. I'm praying I was not king last night. I'm just Duke Uther, because then I'm in half as much trouble. and then I'm going to have to go find my host. And I probably got into my cups, and I did stupid things while in my cups. And not that that's any excuse for bad behavior, but I'm going to try to make my apologies and own whatever occurred, because I must not remember it. So that's really, I mean, you got to own it, right? So
Right. Okay. Who is your favorite fight ever?
man, that's a hard question. It's hard to put it down to one.
You can name a couple.
So one of my most joyous fights ever is King, when me and Duke Felix finally got to really tear it up at Pennsic, and I was King of the West and he was Duke Felix, and we're just going at it hammer and tongs. I was King of Ontario, I take it back. And we're just going at it hammer and tongs. And that was a chivalric moment where we had one of the hardest passes. And I know the mid realm doesn't play as rough as that normally. And Felix was just trying to cut me in half. I will never forget that set. I will never forget being in Ontier at like one of the baronial wars, and we're having all these fights. And it's not exactly a fight, but we're smashing the lines. I'm with Kjart and I'm having the best time ever. And all of a sudden, I go to pick my sword up and my fingernail is like this. It's sticking straight up and down. And I'm like, with Kjartan, and I'm like this. And I go over to the EMT and I'm like, can you make that better or put it down? He's looking at me like I'm an idiot. And I'm like, well, just rip it off. And he's like, I'm like, and then give it to him. And then, but that was through smashing through this bridge front. That was amazing. The first time I ever met Branos was amazing. I don't know. Duke Edric out of Caid, me and him met in the finals of the last West Caid War, had a champions tournament, and there was 12 guys on a side, and you had to fight across the line, right? And so it was like 2 dukes, 2 knights, this whole list of whatever. And then it was like 4 squires, and I was one of the Western squires. And so I'm in there with Brand, and me and Brand made it all the way through. Our dukes were knocked out of the tournament first. And then there's all like the King of Caid, the Duke Edric. I mean, it's like the who's who of Caid. I'm looking at Brand. There's like 6 of them left, and 2 of us. And I look over at Brand, and we're laughing. And I had this fight with Edric, and at one point during the fight, and then we're having to fight all these weird weapons as well, because it's meant to be a skill tournament. And Edric, with a great sword, went like this to chop me, and I'd misread it, and I ducked with everything I had, and literally his sword went right down my back vertically. And I went, oh no, I've just turned my back to my opponent, and I jumped up with everything I had, and I went to backhand him like this with everything I had, and he jumped backwards like in the Matrix, and my sword arced across his body and did not hit him, and he hit the ground and did a roll up, and he was ready. And we're with these like big Dane axes or something. It was these big 2-handed weapons. And we've joked about that and laughed about it over the years. So those are some great moments in fighting, I guess.
That's cool. Who are your favorite people to watch fight?
I love watching Jade fight. When he's in practice and doing it. Jade hasn't really been in practice in a long time, so that's hard. I love watching Thorin fight. He's way more thoughtful than I've ever been. I really admire Thorin's fight, Duke Thorin out of Ontier's fighting. Right now, one of my favorite fights to watch is Hansa. Hansa is, I'd gone back and forth with Hansa for years, and he was trying to figure it out. And honestly, he was fighting with a small strap heater for a long time, and I don't think it really suited him. I think he was bound up by it a lot. As soon as he went to his Bavis, oh my God, did he get fluid and start getting creative and just doing some bad stuff to me. And I was like loving every minute of it. And so that's really been awesome to watch. I don't get to see Christian, your king, fight very often, but I got to be honest, I saw the end of the finals a couple with him and Sven, and that was amazing to watch. And I remember him at Pennsic when I was King of Ontario and just joining the SCA and his journey. And to be honest with you, I know he's the next generation badass guy. And I'm thinking he's the young guy that should be beating the old man up. And so I'd like to go fight him so I get my beating and check it out. I really have enjoyed watching his fights.
He's quite a skilled fighter.
He looks like he's on fire and super intense. That like Eye of the Tiger, he's always that brooding.
Intense is the perfect word.
That
I
was
think
me
we
in my
lost-
20s.
yeah. All right. And then the bonus question is, who's the cleanest fighter in your kingdom?
In my kingdom. Man, I actually think Duke Miles is one of the cleanest fighters in our kingdom. You know, there's a guy who's gone to finals lost. Um, I would also mention, you know, he came fought in our crown. Duke Havork out of Vontier was amazingly clean and chivalric as well. Two of these guys I just saw. I've only seen Havork fight a couple times, but I really was impressed by him. But in our kingdom, he came to Kingdom of our crown, and I'm like, wow, what a great guy. But then Miles, I think, is one of the cleanest fighters. I think he's very awesome. So
It super is. Okay, well, thank you very much. I
thank
really
you.
enjoyed talking to you, and thank you for telling us like some really cool stories tonight. That was awesome. Um, Thanks everyone for joining us. I am talking to, I think, Duke, oh God, what is his name? Vitus Polinius from Drachenwald on Saturday. That's going to be early because of the time difference. So you guys should tune in and it'll be fun. Thank you, Your Majesty. I really appreciate it, and see y'all later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for the interview. Bye bye.